A feasibility study can make or break a project. Today, I'll be showing you how to build one fast, clearly and convincingly, so your proposal actually gets approved or funded. In this video, we'll walk step by step through creating a clear, compelling property development feasibility study, combining zoning analysis, massing options, data tables and visuals that speak to both logic and emotion. You'll learn how to test different development scenarios, compare them side by side, and present your findings in a way that decision makers can immediately understand and trust. To demonstrate this, I'll be using Rayon Design, an all-in-one next-generation tool for architects, urban designers and real estate professionals. You can create a free Rayon account using the link below to follow along. You'll also find the project file used in this walkthrough linked in the description. So let's get started. The first step in any feasibility study is solid due diligence. Start by importing your DWG or PDF site plan into Rayon and scaling it accurately in just a few clicks. Okay, let's start by importing our DWG. So we've got a site map and we can import that as either a PDF or a DWG. We've got the DWG, so I'm going to find it here. It's just called sitemap and I'm going to press open. So there are a number of options that I can use: import hidden layers, import empty layers, import blocks without instances. So I'm going to keep those not toggled on and I'm just going to import. So this just opens up a temporary window with the sitemap in. And you can see that here. So you can see the contours, you can see a number of trees and then a roadway and then a number of buildings along that roadway. And we have this designated site here, which is shown as a solid fill. Now, it's going to be asking me to draw a line by clicking on 2 points. So for example, I know that this building is roughly 24 meters. So that coming in at 24.71 meters, I know that's going to be accurate. So I could change the format that is measured in, but I keep it as meters and press continue. That then allows it to process, and then I will pick an insertion point. So I'm just going to put it in there, and you'll see that it comes in on an import layer. So that's that. And then all of my sub layers, so all of those layers that are already in the DWG are within that. So each of these has different information on different paths that I can turn off and on, just like I would in AutoCAD, say. So one thing I want to do is lock that. So I'm just going to use that as my base level map. Once your base plan is set, don't skip the fundamentals. Things like slope, access and adjacencies are often ignored early and become expensive problems later on. Mark those key constraints and opportunities directly in your site plan and highlight those value enhancers like close to transit, maybe higher rents, near a tech hub, strong co-living potential, and a tourist area, so short-term rental upside. Clear insights like these instantly strengthen your pitch. Okay, with that map imported, we want to start working up the drawing. So one thing I want to do is just highlight the site. So I can use a polyline. So you have a number of drawing tools down here. A polyline will allow me just to draw around the sort of parcel of land as a continuous shape. See there, I can go in and edit the line afterwards, and I can give that a style. So say I want that to appear nice and thick, maybe even in a color. And as with all things in Rayon, I can save a style. So I'm going to say site boundary. Obviously, the thickness of the stroke will be relative to your scale. So at the moment, we're viewing this at a 1 to 200 scale. If we went even bigger, obviously that scale changes. So we can work all of that when we plot the drawing. So the next thing I want to do is look at sort of analysis elements. So we have a template which is provided within the Rayon library with all of these different site analysis symbols, line types, figure ground elements, things like sun paths, trees, north points. And you can obviously, you could share this as a block library, so this could become part of your drawing, or I can literally just copy and paste these elements. If I right click on here and say copy as export, I can go back into my drawing and I can paste this into my drawing and it'll give me that variety of different symbols. So, I could understand very quickly things like the sun path, the prevailing wind direction, where there might be noise coming from, where a key view might be. And even if I go in and say, for example, want to highlight my major route, I could use a curving line and that could follow this roadway, for example. And then I can pick a style from these line types. So see there, I can just pick on that line slightly bigger, and then I could almost add a polyline that follows that colour, take that off, as my main sort of access route. That gives you all of those sort of ideas of how to best start. You can even start thinking about different transport links, where these sort of key elements might be, for example, where the parking for the site might end up, and maybe things like visual barriers or elements of screening that you want to introduce. So that very quickly starts to help you understand the site, the surroundings around you, and help communicate that in a really clear and graphic way. Now let's focus on the building and sketch a few zoning options. Duplicate the massing and place these versions side by side to compare. We can base each scheme on local regulations and your business goals, one compliant one and the others that test different mixes like residential heavy or mixed use. This shows stakeholders that you're exploring upside while staying within the real constraints. Here, I'll be developing a co-working layout, balancing offices, meeting rooms, and public and private areas to maximise revenue on a typical floor. Okay, now let's look at the zoning. So, first thing I want to do is extract the site itself, and I just want to turn this orthogonal to my viewport. So this, as I said, this is our maximum envelope. So when we're thinking about the building itself, we want to be thinking in very basic terms, very basic blocks. So let's say, for example, we looked at a number of options. So the first one might be just an extrusion of the plot. So say we could offset the plot by, I don't know, say 2.5 meters, for example. So there's a buffer zone around it. Maybe that's planted, something like that. So we could then say that that was our maximum envelope. Now, when I'm doing this in Rayon, we can either do pure zones, so these are just the formal shapes, or we can look at walls. So I'm going to show you both ways. So say, for example, we knew that this building, it's going to be an office building, and maybe we've got a 80-20 split gross area to net. So what we could do first is take account for the wall thickness. So let's say our external walls are 0.5, so half a meter. You'll note that I'm in meters in my length units, which is there, which I can change to millimeters if I want. And I'm going to introduce a zone. And a zone is basically an area region. So it gives us a fill. You can see there, I can go in and I can adjust it, and that number will increase or decrease. So at a maximum, our gross internal area is around 544 square meters. Clean that up, and I can almost say, if I say save style, this can be office use. So I could say my office use is in light blue. The reality is that 20% of that floor plan will be the core and the services. So again, we could add in another zone in the center, for example, and I think 20% is around 110 square meters. So you could say our core is roughly that, and we can change our color for our core, maybe make that pink. And again, I can save my style and say core. Now, obviously I want to subtract one from the other, so I can just adjust this shape by adding some points. So then now we know that our net to gross is about right. So obviously I can change the title of this zone. So this up in the top right hand corner, I can call this office and call this core. Now that's obviously a very, very basic way of doing it. And if I wanted to look at the options, let me just change this style. I'll just attach that style. I'll turn this into a nice solid black line, so it looks like the boundary of the building. So say I wanted to do another option very quickly, I could almost just use these elements and say, oh, actually, maybe there's a building form that sits to the back, and this core sits on the back of the building, like that. We can follow that, and then I can very simply make this there, and then I can change this to office. And exactly the same thing. We could make this as complex as we wanted. So, we could almost say maybe there's a U-shape form. So maybe there's sort of 10-meter wings. And obviously, because this is just a shape we're basically adjusting, we just have to tweak the points to give us the area like that. And you can see the number updates. We can clean out these working elements. So 3 very simple options that we can do with those basic zones. A way I probably prefer to work is with the wall tool. So we can set the wall tool up to be very simple. So the wall tool here, if I just press it on here, the wall easily connects. I can go in there and I can change the thickness. So I could almost set up a series of feasibility type wall build-ups. So I could save that as a style and say external, and it's just a basic wall. So say for example I wanted to recreate this one. Instead of doing this as a line, I do this as a wall, and really it just allows the drawing to be a little bit smarter rather than just a shape. And zones act slightly differently with walls. They basically fill, so they sit, they see where the surrounding wall is, you click on it and you get a zone. And if I adjust that, it's a bit simpler in terms of how it updates, a bit easier. So for example, if I then wanted to have this core shape in here, let me just change my color. Again, I can change my wall type, and you'll see there that it then interacts with this new wall. I could change my wall thickness to something like 0.3. Again, I can say that as core wall. My zone has interacted with my inner wall rather than my outer wall, and I can create a new zone. So Z as a shortcut. And then as we adjust these, they both update rather than having to trace, basically. That's why I prefer to work like this. And then just very simply, we've updated these to consist of walls rather than shapes. And again, I can go in here, I can pick my style, and I can go in and rename. And that's a very basic look at how you would put together these zones. The other thing you can do is look at zone dividers. So you'll see down here next to zone, there's something called a zone divider. So this is really helpful if you then start to think about how you might segment that space even further. So for example, with this one, we could say, I'm not quite sure, but maybe this core is actually separated into different things like the stair, the riser, some toilets, for example. So at this sort of feasibility level, we could split that thing and say, actually, because of those zone dividers, I can add in, a couple of different areas, and maybe they're, consistent on a theme of color-wise sort of thing, but they sit within the wider space. Similarly, we could look at splitting the office space, for example. So maybe we need to start looking at different types of tenure. So maybe there's private offices, and maybe there's co-working. So on a typical floor, maybe we want to split that office space. It's still office, but we could just fundamentally split it without adding a wall. So I could even use the same color code. So the zone divider can be used to split a space or a zone without introducing a wall. And obviously with all of those things set, we can add things like a key, for example. So any of these elements, I can take a style, use my pick a style tool, and very quickly build up a palette, my text element. So I can do exactly the same thing with styles. So I can change the size of the text, and I can even save that style as its own thing as well. So if I went in later and changed the color, it would also change as well. So there we have those sort of very basic ideas of space and form that you would use in your feasibilities. And that's it. You now created the core of your property feasibility study. 3 floor plan alternatives with 3 tables indicating the ratio and mix of square meters according to each use case. Feel free to add information like the capacity of each space type and a return on investment benchmark, and more as your own custom properties. Okay, so with a little bit more work, we've shortlisted this first option, and I've begun to explore more in detail how the layout might work and what the balance between, back of house spaces, front of house spaces, what the sort of net to gross might be in these 3 sub options. So we've gone from, a big idea down to, so just like I showed you before, each of these spaces contained by a wall is a zone. So any of these has all these properties, has this title that I can change, obviously has a color coding and has a title, and it gives us the square meters. As mentioned before, the good thing about having these zones contained within walls is that if we go back and change those things, you can see those numbers changing. The other thing we've done is to title them option A, option B, and option C, and I'll come on to why this is really important. Obviously, when we're talking about early projects, we are looking at the numbers. So let's have a look at Rayon's tables. Next, we'll use Rayon's table tool to calculate and summarize the key data for each alternative. Start by naming each zone based on this scheme. Select the zone, rename it from the top right corner. Rayon then automatically pulls the zone names and tags with their square meters into a table. Now, let's take a quick look at how to set that up. So we can add a table, and the table will be reading the properties from the model space. So I can look at what model space canvas I'm looking at. So I'm going to be looking at the floor plan. And here at the moment, it's just giving you every element in the model. So all the walls, all the windows, all the bits and pieces. So what I want to do is go into categories. So at the moment, we're only interested in zones. So these are the areas basically. So we can turn off walls, we can turn off block instances. And you can see there, because we're in this model canvas, we have option A elements, we have option B elements, and option C. So the next thing we want to do is filter them. So we basically want to say, right, we want a table for option A. So just the areas that we're talking about in option A. So we say includes option A. And that means anything that says option A, so it's included in the title of that zone. So as I said before, the title of the zone is included here. That is then included in our schedule. The next thing we want to do is add a column, and we want to add an area column. So we can have lots of different custom properties, but obviously at the moment, the key property we want to be aware of is area. So I'm going to click on area, and this now tells you the area that is related to these different spaces. So for example, let's find 13.42 and see that there. When I click on it, it gets highlighted in my table list. And as before, if I move this wall, it then gets updated. You can see there in that table. So it's a smart table. It's always looking at the properties of the drawing. Now, one thing we can do with that is bring that into the drawing. So say we wanted to plot that on one of our presentation sheets, we can insert that table and its properties here. So all I'd need to do is make sure my text is set about there. Yeah, that looks good. And that table can sit alongside my drawing. And then anytime I adjust it, that table will update. The really powerful thing I can do though is to be able to group those elements. So if we go into, we can go group by. So we want to group by name. So now we're basically collating all of those office elements, circulation elements, and public elements and giving a grand total, which is obviously really important if you just want the highlights, you want the summary. And we can open or collapse those groups as we see fit. So if we're just looking at this very quickly, we can say this option gives 306 square meters of office, 129 of circulation, and 91 of public space. So that's obviously really key, very easy to digest. Now, because these are grouped, you can't place them on the model space itself, but you can export these to another piece of software. So something like Google Sheets or Excel. You can see here, I can export a CSV file like that, my table there, and then I can open that in my software of your choice. The other thing I can do is add custom properties to these elements. So for example, let's click on here. And at the moment, we can add a zone property. So we have a number of properties already built in. So things around scale, project name, for example. I can add a new property. So we could say rental value, for example. Have that as text, as a number, as an area, a length, a volume, price. So we could say that as a price. And we could say, actually, these units on this side might be at a different rental value than the ones on the south side. So a north-facing unit might get, I'm spitballing here, 200 euros per square meter, whereas the ones on the front, make sure we've got our rental value turned on, and then we could say the ones in the front are actually 350. And then we can go into our table, we can add in rental value, And you can obviously see those values related to those office spaces and how many square meters of certain value office space you have. That could be really, really helpful if you're running those numbers. Similarly, you could do something like tenure, for example. So if we're talking about having some elements of co-working and some elements of lettable office space, we could add in the tenure here. So we've got co-working, or we could say let, for example. So we could say this one is this. We can make sure each of our spaces has got tenure turned on, and then we can submit. And once again, we just need to add a column, and you can see the difference between co-working and let. So you can keep adding those properties to really update your smart table, and whenever you make a change, the table updates. To help stakeholders picture the space, add a sample floor plan with furniture. Whether it's a living unit or an office floor, placing blocks and objects shows scale, flow, and usability. So let's review Rayon's resources to do so. Okay, having looked at the numbers, we've now refined the layout slightly. So we can use furniture and different elements to start really communicating how this space might be. Obviously, we're still early days in the process, so this is really just indicative, but it does help people understand the space better. So we can use Rayon's block library. So Rayon has over 10,000 blocks inbuilt. So the top, side and front views that I can just drag and drop into my drawing. So you can see here, I can go into libraries. In this drop down, I have things like animals, bedroom accessories, carpets, chairs, commercial kitchen layouts, all the different things I could possibly want. So I'm going to click on office desks and chairs, and I could just see how these different things work and start dragging the modules in. Now, that's one way of doing it, or Rayon have got a really helpful template for space planning offices. So I'll just open that on another window. So you'll see here, Rayon have prepared a whole different array of workspace layouts, meeting rooms, reception desks, kitchens, dining areas, and leisure spaces. So again, I can bring those in as blocks, or I can just copy as an export and bring that in alongside my drawing. So, we're working very roughly, very indicatively at the moment. I can just use these to very carefully but quickly plot out the number of desks might be in each of these spaces. Reception desk might be where we might have a dining space. So you can see there very quickly it starts to bring the idea to life. And again, I can add things like hatches and fills to, start to delineate different spaces. So for example, I could add something like a gradient or a texture. Just about breaking up the spaces and giving a bit of life to the drawing, try and explore how this space might be used. Even if the block that you want isn't in the Rayon block library, which I'd be surprised at, you can generate your own one with the Rayon AI tool. So here I can go into generate product, and I can say sofa for an office reception. So what it's doing is that it will be generating an image, and then it would take an understanding of that image and turn it into a CAD block. So you can see there it's come up with an idea, and it'll be doing removing a background, generate the object representation, drawing those top, side and front views, and then estimating the block dimension so it can come into our drawing. And you can see there it's generated a top, a front and a side view. I can place that into my drawing, swap out that one, nice curved one. And you can see here, if I wanted to use that front view in an internal elevation, I could do. I can even go in here and I can change the line style so it matches those that I've already used. As a final step, let's create a polished presentation with a title block and cover page featuring a reference image. Consider adding a summary scheme sheet to clearly compare your alternatives. This helps stakeholders quickly grasp your proposal at a glance. Okay, so I've just spent a little bit more time refining that drawing down. So you can see here some interesting and compelling layouts that look realistic but not too refined or not too resolved. So now I want to be able to present this all. So what do we do now? So we go to new canvas and a new paper canvas. So we obviously model things in the model canvas, we create sheets in the paper canvas. So I'll call that paper canvas number 1, and then I can add a page. So let's say we want this as an A3, and maybe we'll have a front cover, a sheet for the site, a sheet for the options, and a sheet for the final layout. So with these blank sheets, I can do a couple of things. So first of all, I want to add a title sheet to this pages. So if I go to title blocks and annotations in my block library, there are a number of title blocks already made, so I can just drag and drop into my sheet. So I'll do that here. I can obviously scale this down. For my front page, maybe I want a key image, just a kind of inspirational one. So why don't I create a new thread in my Rayon chat? And I could say something like a 5-story rectilinear office building with exposed floor plates and vertical glass panels, some timber elements within a sitting. Perfect. So obviously this is just quite a rough image, just for inspiration. I can do a number of things there. So I can crop it. So I just hold Alt when I do that, and I can bring in, I can give this a fill. I can turn that off, and I can give it a title, co-working, and I can give these different styles. So I could say this is heading, for example, and maybe I want that white, and then maybe this is slightly smaller, less sharp color. So a very simple front cover. Obviously we can contain information like our drawing numbers and address, site location, things like that. In our actual drawing sheets, we can very quickly add our views into our model canvas. So I'll go to base, and think of this like a viewport into your model. So we're basically taking a snapshot to our site. Now you'll notice over here that I have a scale. So I can say this drawing is 1:200 or something, and then a key, for example, to explain what those different elements are. Similarly with our little studies, I can do exactly the same thing where I can easily zoom in. So I can say maybe these are, I can crop there, and maybe even I can increase the size of the key, for example. And then I could even, below them have some areas where I state areas, for example. Office, there we go. So number of options. So even, through the document, you're basically saying we've looked at this, we've taken it down to this, and explored all those elements. On the next sheet, we can add in those more detailed studies, for example. Maybe these are a slightly larger scale, and then we can even find our table. We can crop that. I can scale it to fit, and that gives us our up-to-date information. And last but not least, we can add in our detail page. So again, we go to view, we go to detail, and you can see there that's our more detailed layout. So again, I can set the scale, and I could even start looking at one of the areas in detail, for example. So these meeting tables, for example, and I could scale that drawing up, and I could even use our friendly AI tool to say generate an exo, take a screenshot, and say office interior. There we go. So obviously at this stage it's a very rough sort of understanding of what this space might be, but it gives an interesting idea. So we can remove the background here, overlay those two things. Looks quite compelling. And obviously we can just create a rear sheet for our report. With our report completed, we can then share it. So we can either do a number of things. We can export it as a PDF traditionally. So we go to here, we can export as a PDF. So I can select what pages I want. So these on my paper canvas here, I can just export the screen as it is, or I can select a group of those pages. But the best thing to do, the most helpful thing to do, is to share it. So if we go up here on the right hand side, we can go to share. So we could share it with our teammates. So I could type in there my boss's email or my colleague's email, and that will send them a link able to collaborate on the drawing. So with that collaboration link, they can view the drawings, they can comment on the drawings, and they can even mark them up. We can have a dialogue, and it's all set within inside Rayon. If I want to send it to a client, I can send them a presentation link. So just like you would normally have to export the PDF, download it, upload it to a file transfer site, get the link, and then send that in an email, we can do all of that in one click within Rayon. So here I can just slide this toggle on to publish presentation, and it will give me a link, or I can just directly open that. And there we have it, our front page, and then we've got our site with our analysis, we've got our feasibility sketches with our areas, we have that deeper level plan with those more defined areas, our potential rental values and tenures, and then we have a more detailed look at what this space might look like, what this building might be. The really powerful thing is if I come out of here, I can also make a change. So say for example, we didn't want to show these two options. I could make that change, and then I could go back to share, and I could click on update. That will keep the link exactly the same. So if the client has got the link, they just need to relook at it. I've just updated that, and I'll show you here. So we can jump to that drawing, and you can see that that page is updated, no fuss, all within the model, all very cleanly. So there we have it. And that's how you build a complete feasibility study in Rayon, from zoning options to data tables, layouts, and presentation polish. With the right mix of visuals and numbers, your proposal doesn't just explain, it persuades. You can download the free drawing set from the link in the description. If you've got a question, drop them in the comments and we're happy to help. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials like this one. I'll see you next time.